Okay, so as Michaela anticipated, I'm going to talk about the FairEU project. FairEU stands for Fostering Awareness, Inclusion and Recognition of EU mobile citizens' political rights. I would like to start with the background. And we can say that there have been three issues or three elements that build up the background of the FairEU project. First of all, it's freedom of movement, one of the most cherished rights of EU citizens. In 2017, according to Eurostat, there have been around 17 million of EU citizens who decided to move to another country. So we can say that there are around 4% of EU citizens of working age who decided to live in another member state. So they moved in order to look for work, to study, or to retire. As you may know, freedom of movement is governed by the Directive 2004/38, which determines the conditions on how the freedom of movement can be exercised. It's one of the most important legal tools, and despite the fact that it has been enforced for more than 10 years, several problems with its application. And indeed, EU mobile citizens continue experiencing problems when exercising their freedom of movement rights. Before I actually elaborate on that, I wanted to ask you, just in order to involve you more into discussion, whether you have ever experienced any problems when exercising your freedom of movement rights. I will launch the poll. So I think now you should be able to see the poll. If you can have a look and try to answer whether you have been ever faced with some of these obstacles when trying to exercise your freedom of movement rights. Okay, we are still collecting responses. Give a few more seconds in order to reply. Okay, so far 78, okay, 89% voted. Okay. I think that those who wanted to vote already voted, so I will close the poll and you will be able to see the responses. As you can see, 13% of participants experienced obstacles when they were trying to enter the host country. 25% experienced problems when they were requesting residence documents. 13% had problems when they were requesting permanent residence documents. 38% of you have not experienced any obstacles. You are lucky, because as our research shows, EU mobile citizens on a large scale continue to experience problems when moving to or when living in another member state. First of all, those are obstacles related to long waiting times for residence documents, or their unclear requirements for residence documents. The same problems apply to the non-EU family members of mobile EU citizens. So they are often confronted with unclear requirements regarding visa and residence documents. Sometimes they have to wait very long in order to receive their residence or visa documents, and as a result, they are very often unable to join their family member. And this, as you can see, undermines one of the basic rights, like the right to the family life. So coming back to the presentation, we have 17 citizens who are living in another member state. EU mobile citizens continue to experience problems. And finally, political participation. So as you know, EU mobile citizens can not only move freely within the EU, but they can also be politically active. They can vote in local and European elections. Despite the fact that they can vote, their political participation is very limited. In 2014, there were only around 3 million of EU mobile citizens who registered to vote in EU elections in the host member states. So it means that it's around less than 19%. So EU mobile citizens, despite the possibility of having influence on political life and civic life of their host member states, then don't do it. Why is it? Why is the political participation of mobile EU citizens so limited? That's are the questions that the FairEU project is trying to answer. So as I said, the aim of the project is to foster the successful inclusion of mobile EU citizens in their host country civic and political life. And as I said before, our project covers both obstacles to freedom of movement and political participation. You may think, why is this unusual connection here made? We believe that these two issues are closely related, and the successful implementation of freedom of movement rights have a positive impact on political participation of mobile EU citizens. Just to give you a very simple example, in the majority of cases for mobile EU citizens, in order to be able to participate in political life, in order to participate, for instance, in local election, they have to be residents in the member states. So they have to be able to register. As I said before, many mobile EU citizens continue to face problems, obstacles in registering. Otherwise, mobile EU citizens who want to enjoy other rights, like a right to healthcare, or right to have access to social security benefits, or rights to join the labor market of the local country. If they are unable to have this basic, let's say, right satisfied, we can assume that the political participation won't be their first priority. So the project is implemented in partnership with European University Institute, with ALDA, with Maastricht, Malmo University, and MPG. The activities we envisage include research into obstacles to political participation, campaigning at both local and European level. About the local level, Thomas, who is also today during the webinar, he will tell you more about that. We will also provide evidence-based policy recommendations. We have finally, we have also citizens-focused outreach component, crowdsourcing platform that I will discuss later on. So once again, the project is trying to understand what are the reasons behind limited political participation of mobile EU citizens. As I said, we are looking particularly closely at obstacles to freedom of movement and their link to political participation. But in cooperation with our partner from the university partners, we are also looking at other obstacles, such as complicated voter registration procedures, language barriers, restrictions regarding eligibility, lack of familiarity with the local political environment, citizen disengagement, lack of information awareness. Those are only few, but if you want to learn more about these obstacles, the upcoming webinars will discuss them in a greater detail. Just very briefly, as we have undertaken under the FairEU project were the focus groups. We conducted them in 6 member states with the lowest percentage of EU citizens registered to vote in local elections, and in those member states which had the largest share of EU mobile citizens. So the task of the focus groups was to mainly analyze whether there is a link between obstacles to free movement and political participation. The focus groups took place in Portugal, Ireland, France, Belgium, Greece, and Luxembourg. So what are the findings? First of all, in the majority of the cases, participants of the focus group agreed that there is a link between obstacles to freedom of movement and political participation. There are some differences depending on the countries, but for instance, in the case of Belgium, the most often mentioned obstacle to freedom of movement were the risk of being from the host country. This was particularly relevant for the participants of the focus group. In Ireland, for instance, there was a particular problem of access to social housing for mobile EU citizens, and participants agreed that it may be difficult for mobile EU citizens to be active on political level if they cannot have their basic rights satisfied. So apart from that, some of the key findings that from these focus groups First of all, lack of interest among both mobile EU citizens and local politicians. If there's a lack of mutual interest between these two groups, it's very difficult to improve the political participation of mobile EU citizens. Complicated registration procedures. Sometimes it's not easy for mobile EU citizens to register. The local political system may be particularly complicated. For some mobile EU citizens, it can be difficult to understand who is responsible for what, especially if we have various level of governance in a given host member state. There may be language barriers. This is particularly relevant for new mobile EU citizens who have just arrived to a new member state and face this language barrier, and they are unable to first register for the local election and second to participate in the election. There may be some administrative obstacles. Sometimes they can result from misunderstandings and some kind of myths that are being repeated. And finally, very common finding, lack of information campaigns. If mobile EU citizens are not informed about their rights, they obviously won't know that they can participate, and they won't participate in political life of their host member state. And finally, as I mentioned, we have an important citizen outreach element platform. First of all, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the crowdsourcing, but basically it's a practice of engaging a group of people, a crowd, for a common goal. It can be innovation, problem solving. For instance, at the city levels, quite often they crowdsource solutions for the cities, for instance, new projects. In our case, we are crowdsourcing citizens' experience, let's say. So we want to know about their experience when they were when moving or voting in other member states. It's a two-stage process. First of all, we are asking EU citizens to tell us about their experience. This first stage will finish around end of February. And in the second step, we'll ask them to provide us with the solutions. Maybe they have seen something interesting in their EU member state, or they have seen something in their host member state and they will believe that it worked well. So if they could share with us these solutions, we'll guide them as recommendations to decision makers. Okay, so we have also recorded a short video summarizing the first part of the project. I will send you the link in the chat window, so you will be able to see it later on and see how the first part of the project was organized. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. You mentioned very interesting facts, especially about the barriers that the findings, the key findings, among the key findings, such as language, administrative obstacles, complicated registration procedures, and also as part of the FairEU campaign, as part of the FairEU project, we had another action line to which I will pass to Thomas at this point. Therefore, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Thomas Huddlestone, research director at the Migration Policy Group that coordinated the VoteBrussels campaign that called the EU citizens to register to vote for the local elections in Brussels in October 2018. So if you're listening to us, you are perhaps also one of the residents in Brussels that had to go to vote, had to register, perhaps did not register and did not vote. So Thomas, please share with us your experience, how the VoteBrussels campaign went, what lessons were learned. Did you indeed find the same obstacles that Anna just mentioned? Did you manage to solve them? Did you manage to bring more voters to the local elections in Brussels?
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all see my screen. I'm going to present to you how you can also create a campaign that actually mobilizes EU citizens and non-EU citizens even in order to be informed and inspired to use their rights. Because as we've learned from the FairEU project, there are often complicated procedures and a lack of information and engagement from EU citizen communities, and that's actually what's driving the lack of interest among EU citizens, local politicians. So you need to overcome this big information gap. Not enough information is coming from the authorities, from the political parties, or from EU citizens organizations themselves. So MPG has been working a lot on a citizens mobilizer model where volunteers are trained to actually go out and provide the information that people need. And we were able to pilot this in the VoteBrussels campaign here in Brussels for the October 2018 local elections. Now, the context here in Brussels, just so you realize how essential EU citizens' participation is for the democratic deficit. You can see on the screen that Brussels is actually the second most cosmopolitan city in the world after Dubai. It is therefore actually the most cosmopolitan democratic city in the world. Now, how does that break down, though? 62% are born abroad. If you look here, you can see that actually almost over 1/3 of the population in Brussels is a foreign citizen. And actually among them, 3/4 are citizens from other EU member states who are very unlikely to naturalize as Belgian citizens, so they're going to remain as foreigners. So that means that overall in the city, 1/3 of the population is not voting in the local elections. And in some of the 19 municipalities that make up Brussels, that actually can mean that half of the population is not voting. So this starts to really create problems of the democratic legitimacy of the elected officials, problems of the lack of engagement of citizens, which means that you also don't get a lot of solutions that are well implemented with citizens involved. Now, why is it that many EU citizens haven't been voting in Brussels local elections? There was a large survey done in 2012. We, through VoteBrussels, replicated those results. And that's my first recommendation for you. Do focus groups, do surveys among EU citizens, and really listen to them. So what you can see here, interestingly, is that among people who didn't vote in the previous local elections, only 20% said, well, I didn't vote because I'm not interested. Only 20%. If you look at the other reasons why, some people thought that they didn't meet the criteria to be able to vote. That's not true. Some said, well, I didn't think I could vote because I'm not in Belgium on the election day. There are actually ways to vote in Belgium if you're not on the election day. I would not like to vote, but it was too late to register. There's a 3-month deadline, so you have to actually register to vote 3 months before the election, even though actually the electoral campaign hasn't started. So many people aren't even aware that there's going to be local elections. They don't know what the candidates are, what the issues are, but people still have to register. You see that people have also said, I thought the process was too complicated. I'll explain, part of that might be true, but a lot of that is also myths. And then you see, interestingly, half of people said, I didn't vote because voting is compulsory in Belgium, and this frightens me. So this made us realize that actually there are a lot of fears around obligatory voting, and actually when we got into it, there are a lot of myths around obligatory voting. And so once we better explained what obligatory voting means in Belgium, actually many more people were interested. So as you can see, if actually EU citizens were properly informed about all of the procedures to vote, then actually we would expect perhaps the majority of EU citizens to be voting in the local elections. Now, how did VoteBrussels go about trying to address this problem? Well, what we first did is, based on these focus groups and research, we created a simple training and script with the information and motivational messages that people needed to get across. And we did this in very simple terms. So I'm going to show you how I would present these areas with a simple poll. So I want to know from you now, do you think that voter registration must be complicated in Belgium? So click if you think that yes, voter registration must be complicated. Click false if you think that's not true. I will give you 10 seconds. Great. So all of you said, no, it is not complicated. That is correct. Indeed, it's probably the easiest thing that you'll do in Belgium. That's how we say. We say registering to vote is probably the easiest thing that you're going to do in Belgium. All you have to do is submit a form, which is a one-page form. You complete your name, your address, your nationality, you sign, and then you can return it to your commune in many different ways. You can send it by email in most of the communes. You can send it by post. You can drop it off, but you don't have to go to the commune if you don't want to. And you also don't have to line up and spend your time. Next question. Voting is obligatory in Belgium for EU citizens. Please answer whether you think that's true or false. Another 5 minutes, 5 seconds. Okay. So here, 83% of you said, no, it is not obligatory. Some of you did think it was obligatory. What's very important to explain is that for Belgians, once they are a Belgian citizen, they have to vote for the rest of the elections as long as they remain living in Belgium. But if you're an EU citizen or a non-EU citizen, it's kind of an opt-in, opt-out system. So if you register to vote by the registration deadline, 31st of July, you have to vote on the 14th of October, unless you're out of the country or sick or you cannot attend for work reasons. And then what you do is you give a proxy vote to one of your friends who can vote in your place in your polling station. And the day after the election, up until 3 months before the next election, 6 years later, you as an EU or non-EU citizen can deregister at any time as a voter simply by informing your commune. There are no requirements, there's no checking. It's an opt-in, opt-out system. It has no effect on your residence here in Belgium, or you can even re-register to vote later on if you want. So actually, it's not obligatory in the way it is for Belgians. It's an opt-in, opt-out system. That was a very important message that we would send to people. Another question here. I will get in trouble if I vote in Belgium. There's going to be some risk, some consequence, some sanction. So tell me if you think that's true or if that's false. Okay, another 5 seconds. Okay, so again, 83% of you said it's false. I will get into trouble for voting in Belgium. And indeed, that is false. So many, sometimes we would hear from EU citizens, oh, but if I vote in Belgium, then I'm going to lose my right to vote in my home country, or it's going to affect my expat status here if I work for the European institutions, for example. And the other thing people often heard is, oh, there are sanctions. If people are not voting, then they get a fine, a big fine, which is not true. So what we would explain to people is if you register to vote here in Belgium, it has no effect on your right to vote at any level in your home country. It has no effect on your status. And you could hypothetically get a sanction of 30 to 60 euros if you don't vote, but not a single voter has been sanctioned since 2003. And if anyone was sanctioned, actually everyone who didn't vote would have to be sanctioned. So it's not like your commune is going to be difficult with you and make your life difficult. And then the last myth that we would sometimes hear is my vote will not change anything in Brussels. So do you think that that would be true or false? An EU citizen voting really is not going to have any impact on the elections here in Belgium. So another 2 seconds. Okay, and indeed, 100% of you say that's false. If you didn't guess the point of this quiz, you'll see later, we made a lot of simple, fun quizzes to help people learn how to present the results into their friends. And indeed, what we would say to people to get them to understand the importance of their vote is that actually local councillors in Brussels are only elected with a few hundred votes, and that non-Belgian citizens could be almost 300,000 voters if they registered to vote. That's 1/3 of the electorate, and in some communes they could actually be half of the electorate. So that makes you realize, oh, actually, I have a lot of power here. With just a few hundred votes, that could change the composition of the local council. And then we also explain that local authorities in Belgium have more power than anywhere else in the European Union. So we explain that local authorities have more direct powers in many ways in their lives. They are the main investor in the local infrastructure. So if you feel like your area is not well served, it's because the commune is not properly getting those funds in order to invest. And we thirdly explained that the local authorities are the main lobbyists for your voice to be heard at the regional level and at the federal level. So as you can see, this was just 5 minutes, but this is really the essential information that people need. And we worked with the government authorities, the Brussels Commissioner for Europe, who made a great brochure that answered all of these frequently asked questions. And we would actually give the application form with the email addresses and the postal addresses directly to people, so that they could immediately act on on their desire to register. They could directly register by sending it by email or even giving it to us, and we would drop it off for them. So what did we do then? Once you get a good set of information, a simple motivating message, it's really critical to train, coordinate, and motivate volunteers. We ended up training over 100 volunteers, many of them EU citizens who weren't engaged at all in other forms of Belgian politics or local life. It was often their first way of getting involved. We trained them on these messages, and we asked them to share our content on social media. We asked them to invite us to their offices for lunches, because many non-Belgians work in offices where most people are non-Belgians. We asked them to join us in associations that were having events, and we would speak as speakers. We asked them to join us at festivals to share this information and brochures. And they also came up with new ideas of what we could do. We made videos, we did fun actions. We did a day of action in 20 European Commission buildings with 60 volunteers on one day, and we collected 330 applications. And I would then therefore recommend that once you've trained and mobilized these voters, don't focus on creating your own events. You should try and reach voters where they are. So contact existing events, existing organizations, and explain to them why the elections matter to them. So for example, a school could share your information because in Belgium, actually, it's the local authorities that decide on the school policy and the school infrastructure. So parents that want to actually be supporting their kids' education need to know that they have the power to influence education through the local elections. So we would have our volunteers contact the organizations that they are members of or that they know, and also invite us to their offices, which you can see here on the map. It meant that we, in this case, did a lot of our events in the European quarter, because that's actually where a lot of Europeans either work or also where their associations organize their events. I recommend that also you don't spend your time designing too many of your own materials, but that you work with authorities to develop trusted materials like we did with the Brussels Commissioner for Europe, because that way, when you're providing the proper information and mobilization, motivating messages, you can actually point to materials from the authorities to say, this is not coming from me, this is actually, as you can see, coming from the frequently asked questions of the authorities. And then if you're going to develop some materials, you can focus on filling the gaps. So providing fun materials, particularly for social media. We in VoteBrussels developed a series of online quizzes that were very popular to communicate the different type of information and motivational messages that would encourage people to turn out to vote. And you can actually go through and take all of these tests at vote.brussels. So if you go to www.vote.brussels, you can actually see this type of materials that was shared a lot on social media and also with fun videos. And we, with our volunteers, targeted the media, but we didn't focus on the big media, the prestigious media. We focused on the media that actually most EU citizens read. And this is actually media that is often underappreciated by a lot of NGOs and authorities. So we were looking at, for example, Facebook groups of EU citizens. We were looking at multilingual materials. For example, in Brussels, there is a magazine of the French community, of the Polish community, of the English-speaking community. And it was actually quite easy to write short articles, do interviews, do Facebook Live events, and get journalists from these communities to share our information. So we were very visible among our community, and we had then great content that we and our volunteers could share on social media and become viral. I also recommend that you think about how you can work in a nonpartisan way with EU citizen candidates, because many of them are actually the ones tasked by their party to increase voter registration, but they don't have the right arguments, the right materials, and you can actually get them to work together in a nonpartisan way where people from different parties actually are working together because they think voter registration is so important. We did that here in Brussels, and actually we ended up having over 300 EU citizen candidates in the local election, more than ever, of which 25 were elected from all different parties, as you can see. In the end, we were very happy with our results. We were able in just 5 months to double the registration rate, and as I said, have more candidates than ever. What you can see here is that actually we were able to raise the registration rate for EU and non-EU citizens in Brussels, which was not the case in the two other Belgian regions. So this really gives you an idea of the effect that the campaign had. And we think that our measures were some of the most effective, but we've also been advising and helping the different local and regional authorities to improve their practices. So just to give you an idea of some of the recommendations that we were developing, you can see what was done in the 2018 elections by VoteBrussels, our partner Objectif, but also what was done by the local government here and the regional government, which is responsible actually for organizing the local elections. And you can also see what the registration situation was after the last local elections in 2012. In March, which was only 5 months before the registration deadline, and what was the result after the registration deadline. And so what you can see here is that actually already in 2012, 14% of non-Belgians were registered to vote in the local elections. But by March of 2018, that had dropped almost by half because communes were not providing ongoing information. So when newcomers were coming, they were not receiving the form, the information, and registering, even though they actually have the right to register at any moment. And then you can see that in 2018, most of the 19 communes accepted registration by email, which was a big facilitator because people nowadays feel like going to an authority or sending something by post is something on their to-do list. They delay it, it feels complicated, whereas people can now send an email registration, take a photo of their form with their phone and their ID document and send it immediately. We also saw that very few of the communes had good online information very early. Few of them were partnering with local NGOs or doing big events. And we also saw that some of them did send out letters, but actually it was when the Brussels region sent out its own letter that we reached most of the non-Belgian voters here. But you can see that actually the initiatives that we did, which was mostly with volunteers, reached also a very large number of people, particularly through social media. So based on this, we had a series of recommendations that were developed by the EU citizen candidates in Brussels at a citizens convention in November. And now we recommend that, as I said, the communes adopt an ongoing information policy and voter registration procedure so that every newcomer, when they arrive, gets the application form, a clear, positive, motivational, multilingual letter, an information pack about why they should vote and how they can get involved in the commune, and that then those newcomers can immediately register by email or other means, and are invited afterwards to a welcoming event where the local authorities present the different services and participatory policies that they have in partnership with associations. We've also then recommended that the region, which actually is responsible for organizing the local election, organize, coordinate, and fund this ongoing information policy, and that at the European level, there's also more work that can be done by the Brussels Commissioner for Europe if their services and reach is expanded with additional support from the Brussels region. So the Vote Brussels campaign continues. We now actually have so many volunteers that want to get involved that we're trying to make sure that all of the EU citizens who are living in Brussels are registered to vote, either here for the Belgian lists or for their home country lists. But if they want to vote for the Belgian list, they have to do so by the 28th of February. So any of you in Brussels, please make sure that you're registered with your home country list or with the Belgian lists, and you can still join us through the Vote Brussels campaign and through the FairEU project in the future in order to make sure these recommendations that we're developing are implemented properly by local, regional, and national authorities. Thank you very much.